Imagine sliding a single dollar bill across the counter and walking away with a juicy burger, a dozen eggs, and still enough left for a movie ticket with popcorn. In 1970, that wasn't unusual. It was reality. Today, that same dollar barely buys a candy bar. Over one lifetime, what made our money evaporate? The answer reveals a hidden theft that changed everything. Let's step inside a world where the dollar truly mattered and what we lost when it vanished. A single dollar in 1970 could stretch from the diner counter to the grocery aisle and out to the gas pump, touching nearly every part of daily life. At McDonald's, a hamburger cost 18 cents. With a dollar, you could walk away with 5 hot burgers and still have coins left for a small order of fries or a soda. Fast food was a treat anyone could afford, not a splurge. In the grocery store, prices lined up in neat rows on hand-lettered shelf tags. A dozen eggs ran about 60 cents. A loaf of bread could be found for a quarter. Ground beef hovered around 75 cents a pound. Sugar and flour, staples of every kitchen, were 60 to 80 cents for a 5-pound bag. Even a can of coffee, the morning ritual for millions, usually cost just under $1. A dollar bill, crisp or crumpled, could fill a shopping bag with basics: bread, eggs, bananas, and maybe a can or two of soup, which often went for 10 cents apiece. At the gas station, analog pumps spun their wheels as gallons poured in. The price for a gallon of regular hovered around 36 cents. That meant 3 gallons for $1, enough to drive a family sedan across town and back, with change jingling in your pocket. Premium gas cost a few cents more, but $1 still bought more than 2 gallons. For many, filling up was not something to plan for. It was just part of the weekly routine, as ordinary as picking up milk on the way home. Even in the small luxuries, $1 carried weight. A diner breakfast of 2 eggs, toast, hash browns, and coffee could come in under $1 in many towns. Coffee alone was a dime. Bottomless in some places, a slice of pie for dessert was another quarter. These were not special deals or one-day sales. They were the everyday prices, posted in windows, printed in circulars, and stamped on receipts that families tucked into kitchen drawers. Everywhere you looked, the dollar was visible and powerful. It moved through cash registers, gas pumps, and grocery baskets, a quiet guarantee that daily needs could be met without anxiety. For most Americans, the cost of living was measured in single bills and spare change, not in credit or debt. That sense of security, of knowing what $1 could do, was woven into the fabric of everyday life. $1 in 1970 didn't just keep the lights on, it opened the door to a night out or a brand new sound. At the neighborhood movie theater, a single bill could buy a matinee ticket and still leave enough for popcorn or a fountain soda. In small towns, kids lined up at the box office with dollar bills in hand, ready for the latest Disney cartoon or a Saturday double feature. The glow of the marquee, the crackle of popcorn, and the fizz of a cherry cola, all within reach of a single shift's pocket change. The experience didn't end at the theater door. For music lovers, record stores were temples of discovery. A brand new vinyl album from the year's top acts, maybe Simon and Garfunkel or the Beatles' latest, usually carried a sticker price of $3, but department store bins and local promotions often dropped the cost to $2 or $3. For $1 or less, you could pick up a hit single on a 45 record, the kind that spun on bedroom turntables and blared from car radios. Billboard ads from the time promised new releases $2.99 and hit singles 99 cents. Live music was an option too, not just a fantasy. Arena concerts for rising stars or established legends ran $5 or $6 for a decent seat. Local bands, jazz nights, and folk coffee houses often charged $1 or $2 at the door. Whether it was seeing Led Zeppelin in a basketball gym or catching a Motown review at the Civic Center, the price of admission rarely meant skipping meals or saving for weeks. teenagers and college students could save up for a show with a few afternoons of babysitting or mowing lawns. Cable TV wasn't even on the horizon. Entertainment meant leaving the house, joining a crowd, and sharing the moment. A single dollar bill was a passport to the movies, to the record shop, to the ticket counter. The cost of fun fit easily into the week's spare change, not a credit card statement. For many, that accessibility defined what it meant to grow up in 1970. Leisure wasn't a luxury, it was part of ordinary life, paid for with a single, well-traveled bill. In 1970, the path to owning a home felt almost within reach for many working Americans. The median price for a new single-family house was just over $23,000. For a couple earning the federal minimum wage of $1.60 an hour, it was not a fantasy, it was a plan. A young teacher or factory worker could look at a modest house and see a future, not a barrier. Picture a newlywed couple in the Midwest. Both work, one at the local plant, the other as a secretary downtown. Together, they bring home around $9,000 a year, close to the national median household income. The math was straightforward. A house cost about 2.5 times their yearly earnings. With some savings, a second-hand car, and a handshake at the bank, they could sign a mortgage and move in before the first child arrived. $1 from each hour on the job chipped away at the dream. At $1.60 an hour, it took about 14,375 hours of work to buy the average home, roughly 7 years of full-time wages. But families rarely needed to shoulder the entire cost alone. Down payments were smaller, banks were local, and one income could cover the bills. The idea of a single breadwinner supporting a family and buying a house was not wishful thinking. It was the norm. Today, that same house sells for over $400,000. Minimum wage is $7.25 an hour, but the hours needed to buy a home have ballooned to more than 55,000 hours. The numbers tell the story. The distance between an ordinary paycheck and a front door has stretched from a few years to a working lifetime. The American dream, once measured in hours and effort, now stands behind a wall of zeros. The numbers tell a story that most paychecks never could. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, output per hour in the U.S. non-farm business sector has nearly tripled since 1970. That means for every hour worked today, American workers produce almost 3 times as much value as their counterparts did more than 50 years ago. Yet when you trace the line for real hourly compensation, wages and benefits adjusted for inflation, the growth is far less impressive. Real pay for the average worker has risen by only 60% over the same period. Side by side, the gap is impossible to ignore. On a chart, the productivity line climbs steeply, while the pay line flattens out, barely keeping pace with rising costs. For decades after World War II, these lines moved together. Workers saw their paychecks grow as they produced more. But starting in the 1970s, the link broke. The economy kept expanding, but the rewards stopped flowing to the people doing the work. So where did the extra value go? Economists point to higher corporate profits, rising executive pay, and booming asset prices. The gains from all that increased productivity did not trickle down to most families. Instead, they pooled at the top, or were funneled into stock buybacks and dividends. The typical worker's share of the pie shrank, even as the pie itself grew larger every year. The result is a mystery, hiding in plain sight, a nation working harder and producing more, but with paychecks that barely budge. The missing gains show up in boardrooms and on Wall Street, not in the wallets of ordinary Americans. As the chart animation freezes, one question lingers. If workers are doing more and making less, what changed in the system that decides who gets what? In August 1971, the White House became a fortress of secrecy. President Richard Nixon summoned his closest economic advisors to Camp David for a weekend that would rewrite the rules of global finance. Treasury Secretary John Connally, Federal Reserve Chairman Arthur Burns, and Paul Volcker, then a top Treasury official, gathered behind closed doors. The world was pressuring the United States to back every dollar with gold, but the math no longer worked. Foreign governments held more than 4 times as many dollars as the United States had in gold reserves. France was demanding gold shipments. Britain had just requested a $3 billion conversion. The gold window was on the verge of collapse. Inside those meetings, Connally urged bold action. Volcker weighed the risks of a run on American gold. Burns warned that credibility was at stake. Nixon listened, then made his choice. On August 15th, he faced the nation on live television. His words cut through the static. The United States would suspend the convertibility of the dollar into gold. The promise that had anchored the world's money since World War II was gone in a single announcement. Nixon called it a temporary measure, but the gold window slammed shut for good. Alongside the suspension, he ordered a 90-day freeze on wages and prices, and a 10% surcharge on imports to protect American jobs. The dollar was no longer tied to anything but faith and policy. The Camp David weekend had set the stage for a new era. Decisions made in secret now shaped the price of every gallon of gas, every loaf of bread, and every paycheck in America. After the gold window slammed shut in 1971, the rules of money quietly changed. The Federal Reserve gained the freedom to expand the money supply without gold backing, and over the decades, that freedom was used. In 1970, the broad measure of money, known as M2, hovered below $700 billion. By the early 2020s, M2 had exploded past $20 trillion. On a chart, the line that once drifted gently upward now rockets skyward, especially after the financial crisis of 2008 and again during the pandemic years. For families, this surge did not arrive as a headline. It crept in through higher prices at the store and shrinking value in savings accounts. When the money supply grows faster than the real economy, every dollar in your pocket quietly loses strength. This is not just inflation. It is a silent transfer. Those holding cash or simple savings see their purchasing power erode year after year. Meanwhile, borrowers and owners of real assets, homes, stocks, and land find their debts easier to repay and their wealth swelling with each new wave of dollars. Federal Reserve transcripts from the late 1970s and early 1980s show policymakers wrestling with this reality. They acknowledged that unexpected inflation acts as a hidden tax, chipping away at the value of savings and fixed incomes. The effect is not random. It systematically shifts wealth from savers to debtors, from wage earners to asset owners, and from the cautious to the leveraged. The chart of M2 is more than a line. It is a record of how the rules of the game changed and who ended up paying the price. Inflation and monetary policy aren't the only forces that shaped the buying power of $1 since 1970. As the world economy opened up in the 1980s, global trade surged. Factories moved overseas in search of cheaper labor, making imported goods more affordable, but putting pressure on American manufacturing jobs and wages. Technology played its own part too. Waves of automation, first in heavy industry, then in offices and retail, boosted productivity, but sometimes replaced workers faster than new jobs appeared. These changes helped keep prices down for electronics, clothing, and even groceries, but they also contributed to wage stagnation and job insecurity for millions. Local policies also shaped the cost of living in ways that aren't always obvious. In cities like San Francisco and New York, strict zoning rules and limited new construction drove housing prices far beyond what inflation alone would predict. The same house that cost $23,000 in 1970 now sits in a market where demand outpaces supply, and local regulations add layers of expense. Federal and state tax policies, healthcare costs, and the structure of student loans have all influenced how far a paycheck stretches. Economists debate how much each factor matters. Some argue that globalization and technology did more to reshape wages than monetary policy. Others point to local housing shortages or shifts in labor law. But even with these forces in play, the story of the vanishing dollar can't be separated from the decisions that untied money from gold and allowed the supply of dollars to soar. The result is a complex web, one where every thread, from trade deals to zoning maps, pulls on the value of a single bill. A college bill from 1970 might have listed tuition and fees at just under $400 for the entire year at a public university. For many families, that was a number you could save up for with a summer job or a few months of careful budgeting. The receipt was simple: one payment, no long-term debt. Today, that same line item has ballooned past $11,000 at most state schools, with flagship universities charging even more. The sticker price has jumped more than 20-fold, far outpacing inflation and the rise in wages. What once cost a few crisp bills now requires loans, applications, and years of repayments. Federal data shows the average in-state tuition and fees at public four-year colleges went from $358 in 1970 to over $11,600 today. The story is not just about higher education getting more expensive. It is about a system that turned a manageable cost into a lifelong financial burden. The promise of a degree, once open to anyone with determination and a dollar saved, now comes with a bill that can follow graduates for decades. A dollar set aside in 1970 was a promise, a future meal, a movie with friends, maybe even a down payment on something bigger. In the pages of an old passbook, you can trace the hope: weekly deposits from a retail job, handwritten interest credits, a growing balance that once felt secure. But the math turned against savers. According to the Consumer Price Index, every dollar saved back then has lost more than 85% of its buying power. What once bought a bag of groceries now covers little more than a pack of gum. That same dollar, adjusted for today's prices, would need to be multiplied by 7.5 just to stand still. For families like Diego's, the squeeze is relentless. Diego works full-time at a chain store, just like his grandfather did decades ago. But when he lays out his monthly budget, rent, groceries, gas, student loan payments, the numbers never quite add up. Even with two incomes, the household scrapes by, while the savings account gathers dust. The system that once rewarded thrift now seems to punish it. Generations who followed the rules, who were told to work hard and save what they can, find themselves falling further behind, not because they failed, but because the value of their effort was quietly drained away. Today, the value of a dollar is shaped less by what you earn, and more by invisible forces rewriting the rules in real time. As prices outpace paychecks, the gap is not just economic, it is generational. The choices made decades ago still decide what is possible now. How much is your dollar really worth, and who gets to decide? Let us keep this conversation going. Share your thoughts below.